Welcome to the Perimenopause and Midlife Podcast. I'm your host, Terry Betsakis, and this is where we talk honestly about midlife, hormones, mindset, and becoming who you want to be next. Welcome to the Perimenopause and Midlife Podcast. I'm your host, Terry Betsakis, and this week I'm talking with Dr. Jo Lukins. Dr. Lukins spends her day inside the heads of individuals, teams, and organisations, seeking to understand what makes them tick and assisting them in reaching their potential. A psychological Indiana Jones, she describes it as a truly fascinating career that she is grateful for every day. She holds a PhD in psychology, has over 30 years of experience and a breadth of knowledge in sport, organisational and educational domains. Dr. Lukins is an associate professor at James Cook University and delivers programs in high-performance psychology for the Australian Defence Force. Dr. Lukins has worked with elite athletes and outstanding professionals throughout her career, giving her a unique insight in the world of success. She has worked with organisations such as the Queensland's Women's State of Origin team, the Dolphins in NRL, Tonga Women's Rugby League, and the Australian Defence Force, as I mentioned earlier. Welcome, Jo. Such a pleasure to have you.
Hi, Terry. It's so great to be with you and to be on the podcast with all the listeners today.
Oh, I'm super excited because I know I'm going to learn lots from you, and so I know everyone out there listening is going to as well. Can you share a little about yourself, what you do, and how you support women in perimenopause?
Yes, so thank you for the introduction, which gave a little snapshot into my life, and the Indiana Jones reference always makes me chuckle, predominantly because I have adult sons, and they've been in a few of my presentations when that's been the introduction, and as they reminded me at 14 that I am not Indiana Jones, but I guess what it speaks to is I have spent my life being curious about people, wanting to understand people, which is probably makes sense that I found myself in a career in psychology. So where that started off, I actually didn't intend to come into psychology. I thought I was going to be a police officer. And
That's
I know it's a little bit of a tangent, isn't it? So the way it came about, and some of the listeners might remember there was a movie way back in the 90s. Gwyneth Paltrow starred in it, and it was called Sliding Doors.
One of my faves.
Yes, and I think the theme of Sliding Doors, that notion that in any given moment you could sort of turn left or turn right and your life might change. You know, sometimes we know we're in a sliding doors moment, other times we don't. I didn't at 17 when I was at the police academy in Brisbane, getting some information about my new career as a police officer. And just by chance, a police officer was walking in the opposite direction, stopped me and asked me what I was doing there. And I said that I was coming to join the police force. And all he did was he said to me, "So what degree are you going to do first?" And you didn't actually need to do a degree back in those days. But it was a very good question because I was 17 and I probably looked 12 at the time. So I went back to my school and back to the guidance officer, said, "I need to do a degree." The police officer said, "Do something to do with people." My guidance officer said psychology. It was the 80s. We just did what we were told back then. So I went to university and I did a psychology degree. And for the good people of Queensland, they probably literally dodged a bullet. I didn't become a police officer. But I continued with my curiosity in people. And then, as you said in the introduction, much of my work has actually been in high performance sport and in defence circles. I do a lot of work in leadership and organisations in schools. And so you could, as a listener to this podcast, hear all of that and go, "Gosh, has Terry got the right guest on this week?" But the nice thing I've found in my work throughout my career is that behind the veneer of being a high performance athlete or one of our special forces soldiers, we're people, and people, all the skills that I teach in the high performance area have immediate application and transferability to any person. You know, high performers get anxious about performance. High performers need habits to create good platforms to be successful. We talk to ourselves sometimes in ways that we wouldn't talk to other people. We're not always kind to ourselves. So when it comes to our mindset and the way that we view the world, the way we think matters. And so there's lots of really great things that we can take from other areas and apply them to our own lives. And for those who are watching us on the podcast, they will probably also guess that I am actually well and truly in the demographic of the listeners. So not only am I a guest on the show, but I'm a listener to the show. Love all the content that comes through from the other experts there. But, you know, the experience for women is incredibly important. And I've been fortunate throughout my career to work in lots of areas with women, particularly within this phase of life and time of life. And so it's really nice to be here with you, sharing some of the things that I know will really relate for the listeners.
Thank you so much for that. I can totally agree with you with regards to transferring skills across different areas. I know when I was an athlete myself in bodybuilding competition, a lot of the principles that I applied in that I then applied in business, and areas that I thrived in business, I then put into my athleticism, and they were general skills that you could just apply. They were transferable. So I know that the ladies out there are definitely going to be able to pick up some great tips from you.
There's a line I often use, and I really believe it, is that you don't have to be an elite athlete to think like one. So that's what I'm hoping to do today, is share some tips and tricks that I've seen in other areas that I think any of us can apply in our own lives with great success.
Yes, absolutely. So what do you think are the core habits that underpin high performance, regardless of whether someone's an athlete or just navigating life?
Yeah, so I think there's quite a few things that are really within reach. So you often, maybe people have heard the term the low-hanging fruit. So the notion of the low-hanging fruit is, and particularly in some of the areas that you've worked in, but it's that notion of what can I reach up and get very easily and readily? What are the things that I can take from high performance? And then also, I think the things with the low-hanging fruit is they are also the elements where you get the most benefit. So I often refer to, this is really where you get the bang for your buck. So I broadly consider a few key elements. Now, the first three I'm going to tell you, I'll tell you all five, and then we can decide which ones we want to speak about most. The first thing that's going to happen is I'm going to tell you the first three, and all of the listeners are going to nod and say, yes, I knew this. Why did I just spend 30 seconds listening to this advice? But as I tell you the pointers, what I'd ask all the listeners to think about is, I'm going to tell you something now that you already know. But what I want you to think about with curiosity is, how is this traveling for me at the moment? How well am I utilizing these elements? So I'm going to tell you that if we start off with the key three that I always start with, and I start with this regardless of who the audience is, it's about fuel, it's about rest, and it's about physical activity. So we absolutely know that those who are most successful in their performances, if we want to use the word performance, but life is a performance, isn't it? So I think that resonates for all of us, whether we're turning up to work or whatever it is that we're doing. But we know that those things that will have a significant impact in terms of how well we travel through the day and how well we perform is how well fueled we are, how well rested we are, and whether we have recently done some physical activity. So those three elements. And whilst, again, you could listen to that and go, well, don't you have a psychology background, Jo? Those don't sound like psychology areas. But what I would absolutely say is, our nutrition is so strongly, linked with how we think about it. Our ability, we all know that we need, probably most of us know we need more rest than we're currently getting. We know that. But at the end of the day, when we're tired and fatigued, it's so much easier to watch another episode of something on Netflix, say, than it is to, get up, put the cat out, pack out, shut down the house and get ourselves off to bed. And we all know the benefits of physical activity, but we know that sometimes these things, particularly when we have a life that is full and we have many things happening, it can be challenging to work out how to prioritize all of these things, because these are things we're prioritizing for ourselves. And of course, if we live a life where we are giving to others, and whether that be family members or whether that be friends or whether that be workplaces, whatever that is, often the person who takes the back seat is us. So they're three things that I would say straight away. And the other two things, and we might dig into these a little bit more as well, is it's also about what I want to call our habits and our mindset. So it's very much about the way we choose to think. And I use those words really carefully, because we can tend to, in our thinking patterns, they're patterns because we tend to do the same thing most days. So if we think about the ideas of optimism and pessimism, and many people would be familiar with those two terms. So an optimist is someone who tends to view the world, through what's going to go well. They are the Tiggers of the world, if we want to go back to the 100-acre wood. And then there are other people who have more of a tendency to be a bit Eeyore-ish in their thinking, if I can put it that way, and tend to think that, every silver lining has a cloud. We absolutely know from the research, and this is where I've spent a lot of the time in my work, looking at how the way you think impacts then how you feel, And it's those feelings then that drive our behavior. So that performance mindset, if we want to call it that. In other areas, you might be familiar with the term of a growth mindset, performance mindset. I tend to use those interchangeably. So that would be factor number 4. And if I could throw one more into the mix, the other thing that I've found in the work that I do that has a significant influence on performance is gratitude. So gratitude and curiosity is the other key factor there. So we could probably talk for days on all 5 of those elements, but those would be what I would say is that's where we can make the biggest changes in our lives, often with the smallest effort.
You're definitely talking my language with all of those 5.
I could see you nodding. Yes.
All 5 of those. I'm like, mm-hmm. And even the top 3, when you think about it, the car that we drive or the washing machine that we use or I don't know, anything else that is kind of mechanical in any way, shape or form requires fuel, requires rest so that the motor doesn't blow out, and it needs to move. Otherwise it rusts and doesn't go anywhere. So we are machines effectively of some sort. And so when we think about it from the application of our items that we use, even our computer, we put it in sleep mode at the end of the day so that, it doesn't do whatever it does. I don't know what the technical is. I'm not a tech person, but I know I need to put it into sleep. It needs to rest, all that sort of thing. So why do we put those things aside for ourselves? So that's the area of machines. How does it all apply with regards to everything else in life?
Yes, I think this is such an interesting way to look at it because it makes sense to us, doesn't it? We can look at it very logically and say, we know we need to fuel the machine, we need to rest the machine, we need to move the machine. And then, of course, what we all know is sitting in the middle of our machine, unlike our washing machine and our car, is a great big heart and a beautiful brain that takes us all sorts of places. So one of the ways I like to approach fuel, rest and physical activity, because again, people might be listening to it saying, is she going to tell us what? Everyone tells us that we need to do those things, and certainly we do, but that's not specifically my expertise. One of the things I find really helpful when I'm thinking for myself about how am I going with my fuel, how am I going with my rest, how am I going with my physical activity, is I like to apply the same 2 questions that I encourage the sporting teams I work with to apply to what they're doing. So let's say we get a sporting team, whatever the sport might be, everyone can think about whatever their favourite sport is. I do a lot of work in rugby league, so I'll go with that example if that's okay. The team that I might be working with have just played a game on the weekend, and let's say they've won, because it's always a much nicer week for me if the team has won. So let's say the team has won. And what will always happen with a sporting team is there's a designated time to come in and review the performance. So that's one thing for us to think about, is that regularly sporting teams stop, reflect, look in the mirror and say, how am I going? So that's the first thing that we can take out of what sporting teams can teach us, that time to review, because if we can't see it, we can't change it. So what the sporting teams need to be able to do is to come into the team meeting. If we can imagine we've come into our own team meeting and we're having a look at our own performances. And there's 2 really useful questions that we can ask ourselves. So the first helpful question to ask ourselves is, what's going well? So the very first thing that you want to do is ask yourself, what is going well? Because the tendency is, even as we said before, our fuel or our physical activity, there'll be some of us listening going, oh, I'm not doing very well at that. I need to be doing more exercise or eating more of this or less of this or whatever the thing. I need to be getting more sleep is usually what people are saying. What I want us to start with is what's going well. And the reason that's so important is that it does 2 things for us. It helps us to feel better. So when we feel better and we recognize our successes, then we're more likely to engage in helpful behaviors for ourselves. So it helps us to feel good, and that should be enough of a reason by itself. But there's an extra benefit for it, and that's if we reflect on the things that we've done well, it sets us up to repeat them. So when I work with a sporting team and they come in and we say, what went well today? And they might say that our communication on the field was really good. They might say our passing on the left edge was really good. And they might say our kick chase was really good. All football terms, does not matter if you don't understand them. But you can answer your own questions and go, what went well? And the reason is I can absolutely tell you that sporting team want to do those things again next week when they play. So we as women want to be able to go, what's going well for me. So it might be that I feel like I'm doing really well at getting up at the time that I want to, which frees me up then to do some physical activity. So my wake up time and my morning routine might be something that I'm really happy with. I might notice that my fuel for breakfast, maybe the reason my porridge in the morning, which actually is what I'm eating at the moment, delicious. I love porridge. But part of the reason that's going well for me is the night before I'm preparing the oats and putting the milk in and just popping it in the fridge, just to save myself 15 seconds the next day, which I know doesn't sound like a lot, but anything we can do to make our lives easier, it just makes it easier. Of course, I'm going to have porridge. There's already oats in the fridge waiting for me. So thinking about what's gone well is something that I've learned in sport can apply to my own life, and it helps me to repeat the good things that I want to do more of. And then the second question is to ask ourselves what isn't going to plan currently, and then here's the important part, what is the lesson from this? So rather than what am I doing wrong or how am I a bad human, that is not the question we want to ask ourselves, because we know that with anything that we do, two things happen. Success leaves clues. So that's why we ask question one, what's going well so I can repeat it? And what we also know, in addition to the fact that success leaves clues, we know that any disappointments in life, there is a lesson sitting in there for us somewhere. So let's just say I'm looking back on my week. I'm making this up. But let's just say I look back over my week and go, I had a full week at work. I didn't get a chance to do my meal planning last Sunday. And so I was on the fly every afternoon and it was just easier. And I just ended up getting takeaway every night for dinner. And let's say I get to the end of the week and go, don't mind the odd takeaway, but probably don't really want to have that 5 or 6 nights a week. One, it's expensive. And two, nutritionally, it might not be where I want it to be. Is there a lesson in there? And probably if you hear the story I just made up, you heard the lesson, didn't you? The lesson was I didn't do the meal planning on Sunday. And so the lesson then is being curious about that. And rather than saying again, oh, Jo, you're a bad human, you didn't do your meal planning. It's not that. I had stuff going on. But the gold for me is if I take on board the lesson. And elite sport teaches me that. Elite sport has taught me that the teams that reflect on the successes and learn the lessons from the disappointments with a curiosity are the ones who are much more likely to go on and achieve.
Very, very powerful. The listeners out there who work with me will know those 3 questions all too well. They are in their weekly check-in questions. So those are my clients that I work with will be sitting there nodding, going, oh, is that why Terry asks these questions?
Yeah, that's right.
And even when they do their daily food logs, we're always looking at, okay, what went well, what do we need to focus on, what are the sort of the tips? And then when someone eats, something off plan, I always factor in treat food, but if they've kind of gone overboard on treat foods, then they're like, oh, what did I learn from that? Probably that I shouldn't eat so much all in one sitting, as an example. So exactly that, just being able to look back and reflect on, oh, how's my body feeling? How am I moving? How am I, and learning from that. So absolutely agree with all of those points. Thank you. Very, very valid.
And I love that question, those questions that you asked there, Terry, because, and then here's the point for the listeners, is that kind of framing of question, what does it take out of the whole scenario? Judgment. Because if we're sitting there judging ourselves and if we're using what I refer to as should language, I should do this and I should do that. And of course, what happens, I often somewhat cheekily say, try not to should on yourself. Because what happens is if I should I'll stick with my terminology, but if I should on myself and say, oh, I should eat these 5 foods and I should never eat these foods, which, is thankfully not how I travel through life. But if I do that to myself and then I eat the thing, or I don't do the thing that I said that I should do, then the emotion that comes with that is guilt. And if ever anything's going to send us down the highway of poor choices, it's feeling that guilt. So just, if you've had a human moment and it didn't quite go to plan, then learn the lesson, because the great thing is you've got another week in front of you to tweak it and to improve on it.
Yeah, correct. And I guess guilt usually comes with moral decisions, and what you've eaten is not really a moral decision. Doesn't make you a good or bad person. It doesn't. You haven't broken the law or anything like that. So
No.
save the guilt for, the moral
The big
stuff, I
ticket
guess.
items. Yeah, that's right. That's right. Not the daily activities.
Yeah, absolutely. Lord knows we get enough of that guilt stuff through all the things that we
Absolutely.
do and don't do.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah,
I know.
that's right.
What would you say separate people from who are consistent with habits versus the people who are constantly falling off track? They really want it, but for whatever reason, they're just like, oh, I've got to start again. Oh, I've got to start again.
Yes, yes. And I think you've captured it in that question. So what I would say is good intentions are a great place to start. So that notion of, and that's a lot of the work. I used to do a lot of work individually with individuals as a psychologist. And so what that would mean is often people would come into me and in a nutshell, what they would be saying is, my life currently looks like this. I'd like it to look like that. Help me get from this to that, and so I was helping people to change behaviors, helping people to change attitudes, which is, a lot of us, it's not the titles we use, but we're behavior change agents of sorts. And so the challenge then is when I say to myself, I'd like to be doing more physical activity, or I'd like to be changing my nutrition, or I'd like to be, getting to bed earlier, whatever it might be. And I say, I really, really want that. And in the cool light of day, it's a very easy intention to make. My intention is I'm going to get more sleep. The challenge for us with it is that good intentions aren't enough. So good intentions are fantastic. That's where you start. If you don't have an intention, then nothing's going to happen. But the bit where we're most likely to fall out of the habit or not continue the habit is the planning that goes with actually putting the good intention into action. And I think that's where we sometimes fall down. So it's even if I'm saying I want to be doing more physical activity, the first question I would ask someone if I was sitting with them is, I'd say in a non-judgmental way, okay, so tell me a bit about why you're currently not doing that. If you're saying that you want to exercise, let's say, I'm going to make it up. Let's say you want to do some physical activity 5 times a week. And I say, what does it currently look like for you? And they said, oh, maybe once or twice a week. And I would say, help me to understand a little bit about why it's currently not sitting at 5. And then that's when they're going to tell me what the barriers are. That's when they're going to tell me what the things are that are getting in the way. And life is really about yes and no decisions. That's all we're doing. If we say yes to one thing, by default, we're saying no to something else. So, for example, you and I both said yes to this interview today. So that this is what we've prioritized, and I'm very grateful that we have. So this is what you and I have both done. But by saying yes to our conversation, we have both said no to doing anything else in this hour of our time. So the same thing happens with our habits. So if I'm saying that I want to do more physical activity, I'll stick with that as an example. By saying no to the physical activity, not doing the extra 3 sessions a week, I'm saying yes to something else. I wonder what that is. And I wonder where that sits in my priorities for myself. So considering life through the yes and no choices is really helpful, I think, for setting us up with the intentions. And then the reason why I think sometimes the habits don't convert, they don't become permanent action, they don't become like brushing our teeth. So I'm going to guess most of our audience brush their teeth every day. And it's not like, oh, I've fallen off the wagon, I haven't brushed my teeth for 3 months. Like that's a habit that we've all implemented.
Yeah.
So for some people, physical activity is the same. It doesn't even occur to them to not do the physical activity. Other people, it's more effortful. So that's a place in motion for most of us. But thinking about it as if you're currently not doing something, then you're saying yes to something else and being curious about that. So I use the word curious a lot because I think curiosity helps our mindset. And I think so it's about having the plan. And then it's also about how do we manage when it doesn't, the plan doesn't follow through. So I've been doing the physical activity. Let's say I've managed to get it up and rolling and I've been going for 4 weeks, but then I get sick or I have to travel for work or, something's happening with the children or whatever the thing might be, what the life. Yeah. Okay. Insert life here.
Yeah.
And so then sometimes it might all go out the window. And when it does go pear-shaped, it's what we do next. And that's the other great lesson that you can take from sport is, and we are saying this constantly in sport, it's not so much what happens to us, it's what we do next that's important. if I can share a sporting example from last year with the women's origin, and I can share this example because it made it onto the TV, is we were in the dressing sheds right before the game started. It's state of origin. It's the biggest women's football game probably in the world on the calendar. And just at the last moment before we went into the team room for the final address by the coach, one of our players kicked a ball to the coach. It accidentally hit the sprinkler system in the roof and set off every sprinkler in Suncorp Stadium in our dressing sheds. And if anyone's ever wondered how fast the water comes out of those, it's very fast. And unfortunately, I think that water had been sitting there for a while, so it stunk. So we had smelly water pouring through our dressing shed just before we run out for the game. So that doesn't happen to most of us, but most of us have had that kind of moment along the way where, the unexpected has happened.
Yeah, life steamrolled you.
Absolutely. And delivers you something completely unexpected. So that's the bit. Once that's happened, that's happened. There's nothing we can do about that. But where our control lies in what we do next. And so that's what anyway, we cleaned it all up and it was all good by half time, and we shielded the players from a lot of it. But you've just got to roll with it. And so it's that challenge of, if we fall off the habit, whatever it might be, is, almost looking at it like, well, that makes me very human, doesn't it? Because humans drop their habits all the time, but it's, what do I do next? And how can I plan and maybe be a little bit wiser? And what can I do next time I have to travel for work? What type will I do next time that I've been unwell? What will I do next time that life comes along and, hands me a little bit of a curveball?
Yeah, absolutely. I totally agree with that. I liken it to the example of, okay, so you've fallen over and then you stand back up. So if you fall over and go, okay, what do I do next? And you make the choice to not stand back up, are you just going to lay there forever? Are we stepping around you? Are we kind of stepping over you, on you? Like, what's happening there? How are you going to eat? How are you going to go to the toilet? Like, obviously, you're going to stand back up. And so when I pose that question of, are you just going to lay there forever? That's it. You're done because you fell over. It kind of resets the brain into going, oh, I do actually have another option. There is another way I can do this. If this podcast is resonating, I'm Coach Terry Batsakis, a nutrition, mindset and health coach for women navigating perimenopause and midlife. I support women in managing hormonal symptoms, feel more at home in their bodies, and move through this phase with confidence and clarity. If you need support navigating midlife, you can find out more about working with me at terrybatsakis.com.au.
Yes. And what I love about that example is, when we think about it, we deal with adversity all of the time and we dust ourselves off and we keep going. It's just that sometimes some adversities come along and we think, I can't cope with this. But if you think about it, and again, that's where reflection is so useful. We do it in sport all the time. You can think about my successes, what have been all the times that I've overcome an adversity, big or small, because that's part of my skill set.
Yes, absolutely. So lots of women are very, very busy. Women are very, very busy. They're often juggling family, elderly parents, life, sport, perhaps, careers, partners, the list goes on. Life can be extremely unpredictable and overwhelming. So in that sort of situation, in order for them to have some realistic high performance type habits, what would a routine look like for them?
Yeah, so I think you certainly just described my life. So you probably described the life of most of the people who are listening. So that really resonates for all of us. So there's a couple of things there. I think what it needs for high performance is a moment initially just to stop and recognize that that's what's happening. So in some circles that might get referred to as mindfulness. It's the notion that I recognize that at the moment there are lots of things that are happening in my life, and there's lots of demands being placed upon me at the moment. So that's that self-reflection, and it might also be recognizing that I'm feeling tired, or it might be recognizing that I'm shortcutting a couple of things that I normally keep on top of. So I think that because if you can't see it, you can't do anything about it. So we need to notice where we are. And then what we need to do is we need to be kind to ourselves about the fact that that's where we're at the moment. Because sometimes, again, that self-criticism can come in, which is generally not particularly helpful. We go back to what I was saying earlier. If there's a lesson in there, sure, spend some time, reflect, learn the lesson. But if you're also going to spend some time in there being critical to yourself, then that's generally not going to be very helpful for us. So those elements are going to be really important for us as women. And then I think for me, look, there's so many things that you could do. And I think that's probably part of the challenge as well, that in all my years of working with all the different people that I've worked with, there's the two key elements where people talk to me about what they find challenging in life. There's two things. People say they find it challenging for me when life feels out of control. And people say for me that life is challenging when it feels unpredictable. So if you throw into the mix an out of control, unpredictable experience, then that can impact us. And particularly if, as women, we are those who like to feel in control of our lives, like to feel we don't know what's going to happen next. And I would say it's not every person that I've ever met, but it's yes. Are we all putting our hands up? So can I put two hands up in the chat? So we know that, so we seek a world that is controllable and predictable, which is hilarious when you think about the world that we live in, which is none of those things largely. But what we can do is we can think about, okay, so in light of all the things that are out of control, what are some of the things that I can control? And I know that sounds like one of those phrases that gets trotted out. But if I can share a sporting story where we really focused on this, is a couple of years ago, I worked with the PNG Orchids, and they are the women's national rugby league team from Papua New Guinea. Now, Papua New Guinea is the only country in the world that has rugby league as its official sport. And when you look at the hierarchy of what is important in PNG, it is God first and rugby league next. And I am not joking. So rugby league, it's not a religion, but it's not far off. So it is such a valued part of life in PNG. And I was fortunate enough to work with the women's national team going to the World Cup in England. So, I mean, there's 1,000 stories that go with that particular campaign. But one of the things that we did during the campaign when I was working with the women in that team is, you can imagine if you've come from living in the highlands of PNG and your first overseas trip is England in the middle of winter and you're playing in a World Cup, it's a slightly different environment to what you're used to. So part of what I needed to do
Just
as
got
a team,
cold thinking about it. Sorry.
I know, got cold. There were so many elements that were different. And so what we wanted to do was build capacity in the players to manage life when it went pear-shaped. So we've all traveled. We all know the things that can go wrong when you travel. And, timing was everything for us. So, you'd have to be at the stadium by a certain time, but you'd have to travel in the afternoon on the freeways when it's pouring with rain and all the things. So there was the potential for things to go wrong was enormous, but what we had to build was the capacity to manage it when it happened. So I was like, how am I going to do this with this group of women? Because I was also dealing with two different languages being spoken in the team as well. So I spoke no Tok Pisin before I went into the team, and I speak bad Tok Pisin now. Luckily, the players' English is much better than my Tok Pisin. But the way I did that exercise, and this is something for all of us to think about, is if you can imagine that I had a whiteboard there, and I had a marker pen, and I drew a very average drawing of an outline of a person. So if you can imagine,
You're not a Pictionary queen?
No. I have a skill set, and drawing, unfortunately, isn't one of them. But that's okay. I'm sure it will improve over time. But what I did was I drew the outline of a person, and we talked about, what is inside us that might happen and some of the challenges we might face, and what is outside of us. So the inside challenges might be things like injury, managing different foods, being nervous about the competition, like that was, we filled this body up inside with all the things that might bother us. What are the things outside of us that might bother us or challenge us? The weather, what social media says about us in the World Cup campaign, all of the different bits and pieces. And sometimes I think being able to recognize for each of us what is within my control and what is not can be a really helpful way to manage ourselves through the world. Because I know for me, I am really mindful and considerate about when I do and I don't come into contact with the news. The news is incredibly important. It's important to know where we are in the world and what's going on. But I know the psychological effects on me if I listen to 4 hours of news stories. I don't generally come out of it going, I feel so much better now that I've just listened to the news for 4 hours. So it's about controlling the controllables, which I know sounds like a cliche, but it is so true. And just that little visual, if that makes sense for people, when you encounter a challenge, you can think about how much of this is inside of me and is actually something that I can do and influence, and how much of this is whatever's happening in the world. That can sometimes then help us make how much energy do we put into this, and then how much action do we put into this. And if I can share with the listeners a little phrase of top piston that I learnt from the PNG women, is there's a phrase in PNG which is Nox Bisi. So that's spelled Noxbisi. Yeah, BISI, that's correct. Nox Bisi, which is PNG for it doesn't matter. So Nox Bisi. So what would happen is the coach would come out and would say, it's going to be raining at training. And then one of the players would go, Nox Bisi, coach, it's probably going to rain in the game. It doesn't matter. So, some of these things we need to be able to push on and push through. And then other things we need to hold our ground, stand our ground. But I think if we can first think about where these things fit, and then maybe if someone is listening to this and saying, well, that's all well and good, Jo, but you don't know my life and all the elements and all the challenges and the demands that I have. And I would respectfully say, absolutely, I don't know what anyone else's life is other than my own. The two elements of what we've already talked about today that I bring together personally is I think about what is within my control, what is not within my control. Can I apply a little bit of Nox Bisi to it? But can I also think about it through the lens of yes and no? What am I saying yes to? What am I saying no to? Because for me to be able to say yes to things, I have to say no to others. And that's the stark reality of the lives that we live.
I love the yes-no approach. That's, I think, something that has really stood out for me today in today's interview quite a lot. I actually have my own story from athleticism and exactly what you're talking about, the unpredictable and the Nox Bisi, a little bit like Hakuna Matata, I guess, for those of us who are Lion King fans.
Yes.
When the very first time I ever competed in bodybuilding, I had not had a period in a couple of months because my body fat percentage was so low that one of the things that you lose in that industry is your menstrual cycle. Well, I did anyway, and many women do, not all women. So I hadn't had a period for a few months, and I've jumped on for my last event of the day, which I thought was going to be the biggest kicker. And about half an hour before I actually stepped on stage, I was like, oh, why am I getting period cramps? What? So went to the toilet just before I stepped on stage, and sure enough, my period arrived. And I was like, great. And for many women out there who can relate to periods, bloating comes with it. Let me tell you, that's not fabulous for a six-pack when you're looking for an event win. So it was a case of, okay, well, what do I do with this? Do I not step on stage because I'm not as ripped as I was 10 minutes ago? I stood on stage and went, well, this is my first time I'm ever competing. This is my third event on my first day of ever competition. I'm going to learn as much of this as possible. If nothing else, I'm just going to get stage presence, learn how to walk around and be comfortable in a bikini in front of hundreds of people. And I had the best time. And I actually placed. So go me. But that was just an example. I could have not stood on stage in exactly that scenario.
Yes. And that's the thing, isn't it? Is that it's not always going to be how we want it to be, but how can we make the best of what it is? And it sounds like in that scenario, not only did you make the best of what it was in that moment, but look at all the wisdom you gained moving forward. And isn't that such a life event that would have happened for you 5 minutes before you, as you're telling the story, I think we're all filling in the gaps going, we know where this is going to end.
Yeah, absolutely. Because when we're thinking of athletes, like you're talking about the rugby players and, all the other athletes as well, I guess one of the things that we don't understand as general population, if we're not a professional athlete or an elite athlete, is, how does your menstrual cycle fit into all this? Or, or your hot flushes or any of the other symptoms that we go through as women. And you're like, well, they still experience all of this. And that's something that they also have to navigate in performance. So it's definitely bringing that relatability back to high performance to just us as women as well. What a powerful segment so far. So before we wrap up, if a woman's listening right now and wants to start building some better habits, what are a couple of things that you can suggest for them that they can implement pretty much straight away?
Yes. So again, as I said, a little bit of self-reflection. So I would probably maybe sit down. I am old school, so I would sit down with a notebook, but maybe you might use I don't know, some sort of digital app. So yes.
Pen and paper,
So
I'm that pen and
yeah,
paper girl.
yes. When you write something down, you learn it twice.
Yeah.
So I would sit, if it was me, I would sit down with a piece of paper, or you could go to a whiteboard, or you could go to, however, but to map out where things are currently and where would you like things to be. So, if I think that's, because then you can start with the end in mind. You've got a little bit of a picture about what it's going to look like. And obviously what we want to do is we want to make sure that we're applying all the goal setting things that we do in sport, and making sure that it's, realistic, and what's the time frame, and all those sorts of things that we can potentially look at. What I would say is, sometimes when we set a goal, that can feel overwhelming. It can just feel too big, and how are we going to do that? So I'm a huge fan of, even if I've got a larger goal, breaking that up into smaller elements, smaller chunks. Why? Because it feels like I can manage it. So it comes back to the point we were saying before, we want it to be controllable and predictable. So what's something that I can do? I often use the phrase, you want to seek out massive, small gains. So I am such a big fan of just, even if it's about, I want to regularly get up early in the morning, let's just say that's what someone's wanting to create as a new habit. I might say, well, why don't you just start off, just do it on Mondays for now, just like make it the teensiest, I don't know if those are proper expressions, but just tiny
My
goals.
kind of language.
Yeah, tiny goals, because you know what you want? You want to win. And what I would say is, initially, let's go with that, stick with that example I gave. Say, I'm going to do that on Mondays. You'll probably find that you might even do it on Tuesday as well. There's no pressure to do it, because you only set out to do it on Mondays. But I think the challenge with, what I would say is the challenge with goals, and absolutely, I think there's so much research that says it's such a great idea to set them. And I work with sporting teams all the time that set goals. But what we've got to remember is, you don't look like your goals. You look like your habits. And that's the way I differentiate the two. The habits are the pathway to the goal. And all of the successful performers I've worked with, and whether they've been in special forces, whether they've been other members of our defence personnel, whether they've been leaders, CEOs, athletes, or the women that I've worked with in some of the mentoring groups in my local community, is that success looks like small habits done well. And so what I would do is, I would probably look at, if you've got a couple little strategies there on how to implement habits, and Terry, I'll talk to you about this. I'm going to prepare a little resource to share with the listeners as well, for you to put into the reading notes, just to give a couple of ideas. But I would just start off so small, with the tiniest thing that you can achieve, and get some success with it, and then find the next thing. Please don't brainstorm a whiteboard of all the things that you want to change in your life. Well, you can do that, but please don't try and change them all at once, because truthfully, your head will just explode. Like, it'll be too much. So I always start off as small as I can. And that's where you get, that sort of snowball effect, if we want to use that analogy. And then we get energy from that. I remember working with a local gym, and they were doing a 12-week challenge, which I know you often see those in gyms. And this was back in the day when it first started out. Yes. And so I went into this particular gym, and I do quite a bit of speaking. So I went in to speak to the group at weeks 4 and 8. And week 4 was looking at habits. And week 8 was looking at how do you maintain change after the challenge. And I just remember this woman came to me after the 4th week of the program. So she'd been in this 12-week challenge for 4 weeks. She was there. She was giving it a red hot crack. I'd come in and given them a habits talk. And so she came up to me and she said, "Look, Jo, my life, it's so full at the moment." She said, "I've joined the gym. I'm supposed to do all these other things as well. I just don't have the headspace for it at the moment. Do you think it matters if all I do right now is the exercise?" And she was just looking for some validation in that moment. I said, if you've come into this program, you've signed up, there's a win. And if 4 weeks in you're doing the physical activity, and that's what's within what you can manage right now, that's awesome. That is so good. And you do not need to do anything else. I know there's things you can do, but let's just give yourself a bit of a break here. And I'm going to be back in 4 weeks. Why don't you let me know how you go? She said, "I'm just going to do the exercise." I said, "Great plan. Love it." And so week 8, she came up to me with this big smile on her face. And I said to her, how are things going for you? And she said, "It's the strangest thing." She said, "Remember I said to you, all I'm going to do is change the exercise?" And I said, "Yes, I do remember you saying that." And she said, but I've been tired. And I said, oh, okay. And she goes, so I've been going to bed earlier. I said, have you? And she said, and then I wake up and I kind of feel like something a bit healthy rather than what I used to eat. And I said, oh, really? And then she said, and then like I've been taking like nuts and stuff to work. So she was such a great example of she started small. Well, I don't even think she was starting small there. She was taking on, I thought it was quite a big thing that she was doing.
Absolutely.
But for me, the reason small habits are
One
so
step.
effective, is think of it like you pick up a big stone and you're next to a pond and you throw that stone into the middle of the pond. There's your small habit. Look at what it does. It
Yeah, the
ripples out
ripple.
and it impacts everything.
Mm.
So start small, be kind to yourself. Whatever you're doing is amazing. You've listened to the podcast today. You've maybe picked up some ideas that you're already winning, and you'll do what you can, and what you can't do, not busy.
Absolutely. I totally agree with that. And you will often hear me say, if you do one thing every week to make yourself better, today, next year, you'll be 52 times better than you are today.
Absolutely.
It doesn't need to be anything spectacular or huge or, as you said, the one thing that lady did, for her, it might have been big or small, but she joined the gym. She actually joined the gym. That's step one. Step two, actually attend. She did that. And she was like, wow, I'm just going to keep going. That's a win in itself. How many times do people donate to gyms? And it's like, that was one of my big things that I used to say with my staff when I had my big gym a few years ago was, if someone's not attending, we need to get on top of them to bring them back in, see if what's fallen over for them. How can we help them to get them moving again? It's not about the big, crazy, audacious stuff sometimes. It's just, as you said, the little ripple effect things.
Yeah. Little wins. That's what we want.
Yeah,
little wins
thank you.
become big wins. Little by little, a little will become a lot.
Absolutely. I suppose it's like planning a holiday. If you're planning a trip around the world, you don't know what you're going to face around the world. What's the first thing you do? The first thing you do is decide, am I going on a holiday? Yes. Where am I going? That's step two. Step three, have I got a passport? And so you map it out. So the big, hairy, audacious goal, I guess, is let's travel the world. And then you can't just go, cool, let's, how are we doing it? We're just going to walk around or swim, or you kind of got to plan it out, and just step by step. Life is the same. I totally agree with you.
As a holiday over planner, that makes complete sense to me. It's my friends who go, I don't know, I'll just take my passport and see where I end up, and it kind of gives me hives, I think. So I could never do a holiday that way.
I did put my hand up when you were talking about people who like to be organized and in control. I am definitely one of those people. Control is one of my favorite values, as much as people raise their eyebrows at it. Jo, thank you so much for today. I am so excited about everything that you've brought for us. And thank you again for sharing the guide that you're going to share with all of our listeners. They're going to put some tips together. So I'll share that in the notes, as you said. So that's a bit exciting. I love a good cheat sheet, I call them, where people can just refer to something quick and simple. So thank you. Any final words that you want to share with our listeners before we wrap up?
No, I was just going to say that really enjoyed the conversation, and I think what I know for us as women is this is such a great time for women with the focus on our health, particularly in this phase of life. So I was just actually going to say to you how grateful I am that you've got this podcast together for us. We know gratitude is a winner, so when we are grateful to others, you get the compliment, and then I get the feel good factor from having shared it with you. Which comes from a genuine gratitude. So no, I think that the biggest thing I would leave with is for us all to be kind to ourselves, that we are all out there doing the absolute best that we can, learning more information, being curious, and looking forward to the journey ahead. So very happy to connect with anyone who's interested in any of the stuff that I do, but happy to do that through the resource.
Thank you so much. And thank you for coming on to the show. It's been an absolute honor having you, because I know how busy you are as well. Nothing like dealing with so many high performers. And, you work with the Australian Defence Force. I don't think you get, much busier than the Australian Defence Force. They've got their hands full, especially these days. So thank you. Thank you very much.
But the podcast was an easy yes for me. So thank you.
Oh, thank you. I'm very excited to be doing this podcast. It's been in my in my heart as one of my passions for the last couple of years. So to finally be doing it is pretty exciting.
Yeah, it's great.
All right, so that wraps up another episode of the Perimenopause and Midlife podcast. Thank you so much for joining us, everybody. Tune in again next week for our next episode, and don't forget to subscribe, and please share with other women that you know, because sharing is caring. Don't hold it all to yourself. And our mission in life is to be able to help each other as much as possible and straighten each other's crown. Have an amazing week. Until next time, stay awesome.
Thank you for listening to the Perimenopause and Midlife podcast. Join me next time for more honest conversations about midlife and what's possible from here.